Chapter 3. From the 7th Dynasty to the close of the 12th, the transition period and the Middle Empire, about 2400 through 1930 BC. Section 1. The transition period, dynasties 7 through 11. This was a period of frequent revolutions. King after king ascended the throne, but it was a long time before a king arose who succeeded in securing a firm hold on the reins of state. It is next to impossible to give even a chronological list of the kings who ruled in this period, which must have covered some 200 years, and perhaps more. It is owing to this gap, and one that we shall meet with later, that the chronology of the earlier periods of Egypt is so very uncertain. From conditions existing in the times of the 12th dynasty, it would seem that the great hereditary princes of the realm, the Nomarchoi, succeeded in winning some considerable independence during this period. It is but natural that in a time when the kings felt anything but secure on the throne, they should seek to enlist the support of the nobility, and be ready to purchase that support by according them greater privileges than they had hitherto enjoyed. These nobles were a very shrewd lot, and no doubt made the best of the bargain by selling their support to the highest bidder. It was in all probability this inordinate strengthening of the nobility that finally led to the rise of the Theban princes and to their accession to the throne under the founder of the 11th dynasty. This was significant for the entire future of Egypt, as Thebes controlled the destinies of the kingdom for over 1,000 years. Manetho gives only a list of dynasties for this period as follows. 7th Dynasty, Memphitic, 70 kings in 70 days, according to Eusebius, 5 kings in 75 years. 8th Dynasty, Memphitic, 27 kings in 146 years. 9th Dynasty, from Heracleopolis, 27 kings in 409 years. Sincellus, 4 kings in 100 years. 10th Dynasty, from Heracleopolis, 17 kings in 185 years. Of the names, Manetho gives only that of King Akhthos, the founder of the 9th dynasty, of whom he relates that he was the most barbarous and inhuman king that had hitherto ruled in Egypt. He committed many crimes, and was finally stricken with insanity and killed by a crocodile. It is a probable conjecture that Manetho wishes to convey the impression that this king was a foreign invader. In all probability, the Amu-Heriusha, whom Una had so effectually crushed, had been left alone by Meri-Ra's immediate successors, and had again gathered sufficient strength to renew their attacks on Egypt. If this is so, the attack must not have come until after Neferka-Ra's long reign. It seems that this time the barbarians had it all their own way, and had finally succeeded in conquering the country. This hypothesis receives some confirmation, however slight, from the fact that a semi-legendary papyrus mentions combats with the Heriusha under kings Cheruti and Ameno. Judging from the names, Ameno was probably one of the kings of the 11th dynasty, and these battles were then fought in delivering Egypt from the foreign invader. Section 2. The Middle Empire, Dynasties 11 and 12. The 11th dynasty. With the founder of this dynasty, the Theban princes ascended the throne of Egypt. These kings seem to have delivered Egypt from the yoke of the foreign invader, the war possibly being begun by Cheruti and Ameno, though we nowhere find any mention of this fact. The first of these princes mentioned in the lists of kings is the Erpati, that is, hereditary prince, Antef. The three succeeding kings are designated as Hor, and the fourth successor of Antef is the first one to bear the full titulature of Egyptian kings. From this fact, the conclusion has been drawn that the first Antef was merely Prince of Thebes, that his next successors had gradually enlarged their sway until they ruled over all of Upper Egypt and had assumed the title Hor, signifying ruler of Upper Egypt, and that finally the fourth successor of Antef had succeeded in conquering all of Egypt and had consequently assumed the full titulature of the Egyptian kings. This conjecture is entirely unwarranted. It is probable that these rulers delivered Egypt from the yoke of the foreign invader, but any attempt to read the history of the war from the titles of these kings is futile. The founder of the dynasty, Prince Antef, in all probability, was the man with whom the national movement began, though he possibly died before other princes had recognized his authority, and owes his place in the list of kings to the fact that his dynasty based their claim to the throne on him. To translate the title of Hor as ruler of Upper Egypt or as duke is not admissible. Hor was one of the titles of the Egyptian kings. The word signifies Horus, and this title was given the king because he was looked upon as the Horus on earth. The order of succession of these kings is not certain, and we therefore deem it advisable to group them according to their names. This will give us two groups, one of kings whose names were all the same, Antef, and another of kings whose names were all the same, Mentuhotep. Any other arrangement would be equally arbitrary, while lacking the clearness of this. The Antef kings. Antef Ea, that is, the Great, with the throne name Ra Sechem Up Mat, is the only king of this line of whose family relations we have any knowledge. A note on his sarcophagus informs us that his younger brother and successor, Anantef Ra Sechem Hermat, had the sarcophagus made. This sarcophagus is in the Museum of the Louvre. It is of gilt wood and is ornamented with wings folded protectingly about the deceased. An inscription found in Abydos mentions buildings erected by him in this city. A pyramidion mentioning the name of his wife, Mentuhotep, was discovered at Kurna. The record of a criminal procedure against Theban tomb robbers informs us that he was buried in the necropolis of Thebes. The gilt wood sarcophagus of Anantef is in the British Museum. His silver gilt diadem is in the Museum of Leiden. Nub-cheper-Ra-Anantef is mentioned on a statue as the conqueror of Asiatics and Nubians, but the texts do not give any detailed accounts of his campaigns. His tomb at Dra Abul Nega, opposite Thebes, was discovered by Mariette in 1860 to 1861. The stele found in the funereal chapel dates from his 50th year, so that we know he reigned 50 years, and consequently must have lived at a time when the country was tranquil. At the same place, fragments of 2 obelisks erected by this pharaoh were found. An-Ea the Great is one of the kings whose tombs are mentioned in the criminal procedure above alluded to. One of the hieratic copies of the Book of the Dead alleges that the 130th chapter was discovered in his reign. The Mentuhotep kings belong to the same family with the Antef kings. Nebhotep Mentuhotep is known only from a stele found at Kanaso, on which he is depicted as adoring the local divinities of that region, who throw all peoples under his feet, that is, give him power over them. From this, we must infer that Nebhotep carried on wars in Nubia. Of Ra-Neb-Tawi Mentuhotep, we know only that he sent an expedition to the quarries of the Wadi Hammamat to quarry a sarcophagus for him. On this occasion, he caused a great reservoir to be cut in the rock so that the men might not die of thirst. Ra-Neb-Chepru Mentuhotep reigned over 46 years, as is proved by the tombstone of a certain Meru who died in the 46th year of this reign. We know of him only that he quarried stone in Assuan. This pharaoh must have been a ruler of some consequence, for his name is mentioned in all of the lists of kings, and in several lists his is the only name of a king ruling before the Hyksos invasion that is mentioned. Seanch-Ka-Ra was the last king of this dynasty. A very interesting inscription, graven on the rock in the Wadi Hammamat, relates the story of one of his expeditions. In the 8th year of his reign, 3,000 men, under command of Henu, started from Kebti at the mouth of the valley. The expedition had a twofold object. First, to quarry stone for the monarch's tomb and sarcophagus, and second, to visit the shores of Pawent, that is, the southwest coast of Arabia and the Somali coast on the African side of the Red Sea, on a trading expedition. Henu accomplished both objects successfully. To facilitate the provisioning of so large a detachment, a number of stations was established and wells sunk along the line of march. Arrived at the quarries, one detachment of the expedition settled down to work, while the other continued its march to the sea, which it reached at about the place where Qasr now stands. From here, Henu sent out a fleet. No mention is made of the building of ships, to the shores of Pawent, awaiting their return at Qasr. The fleet brought back all the products of this country, consisting of incense, precious stones, and other valuables. Meanwhile, the stone cutters had done their work, and the expedition returned to Egypt. This expedition is memorable in that it proves that this pharaoh was firmly determined to establish a regular trade with Pewent. The undertaking was in a certain sense a pioneer expedition, the duty of which was to survey the road from Qebti to the Red Sea, and, by the establishment of watering stations, to make it practicable. The first king of whom we know that he followed in Seanch-ka-Ra's footsteps was Amenemhat II. The 12th dynasty, 2130 through 1930 BC. The 11th dynasty had been a period of strife. In it, Egypt had been delivered from the domination of the foreign invader. The kingdom had been reunified, and the work of reorganizing the government had been begun. So well had the last rulers of this dynasty done their work that Seanch-ka-Ra could undertake the work of opening a road through the Wadi Hammamat from Qebti to the Red Sea, and of laying the first foundations of a direct commercial intercourse with the coast of southwestern Arabia and the Somali coast. To what extent the work of reorganization was completed when Amenemhat I ascended the throne, we do not know, as but few monuments of the kings immediately preceding him have come down to us. Of the times embraced by the 12th dynasty, we have, however, a fair knowledge. Though the buildings erected by the kings of this dynasty have disappeared, yet the numerous inscriptions that have been preserved in all parts of Egypt contain records of their doings. Much of our knowledge of this period we owe to the tombs discovered at Beni Hassan and Bersha. But even here it is not yet possible to give details or to fully understand all the conditions that led to the rise and the fall of this house. Sehotep Abra, Amenemhat, 2130 through 2100 BC. Reader's note: a map of Ethiopia is shown. End note. About the year 2130, King Amenemhat I ascended the throne of Egypt. What claim he had to the crown we are not told, but in all probability he was related to the last king of the preceding dynasty. The change of dynasty was not accomplished without severe internal dissensions. Several inscriptions allude to these disturbances, but give no details. The new pharaoh was equal to the occasion. He defeated the rebels, and then set to work to reorganize his kingdom. One of his first measures was to curb the power of the nobles who had become semi-independent. The principle of heredity he dared not abolish, but he regulated the succession. When an old nomarchos died, the king chose his successor from his heirs at law, and thus bound the new prince to his person. He also personally superintended a new survey of the whole country. It would seem that during the periods of anarchy, foreign domination, and restoration, following on the decline of the old empire, the Egyptian kings had not possessed the leisure or the power to adjust disputes concerning boundaries which had arisen among the nobles. The stronger had preyed upon the weaker, and many a prince had seized the occasion of enlarging his domain. Amenemhat made a tour of inspection through the country, personally hearing complaints and readjusting the boundaries. He thus succeeded in reorganizing his kingdom in a very short time. And when order was once restored, he was the man to keep it with an iron hand. This policy enabled him early in his reign to turn his attention to foreign affairs. He marched against the Libyan tribe of the Matjiu and conquered them. He also warred on the Asiatic frontier against the Bedouins of the Syrian desert. In the 29th year of his reign, he led his forces into Nubia and entirely subdued the Owaua, a tribe that had begun to give trouble. Like all of the pharaohs, he was a great builder. Traces of his work have been found at Tanis, Abydos, Memphis, and Karnak. The relics of his work found at Karnak are of great importance, as they prove that the great temple of Ammon was founded by this ruler. The stone needed for these buildings was quarried in the limestone quarries of Turah, Ro-Au, opposite Memphis, in the diorite quarries of the Wadi Hammamat, and in the granite quarries of Assuan. In the 16th Upper Egyptian nome, he built a city called Hat Sehotep Ab Ra, as also a fort called Amenemhat Ded Tawi. This pharaoh had in later times the reputation of being a great sage. A papyrus written about 1,000 years after his time, said to be a series of precepts addressed to his son Usertesen I, tells the story of his accession to the throne and relates some other events of his reign. This interesting papyrus, which is said to have been composed by the king himself, is preserved in the British Museum. In the 21st year of his reign, Amenemhat, in all probability, with the purpose of avoiding a civil war over the succession, appointed his son Usertesen co-regent. This practice was imitated by most of his successors. The pharaoh died in the 30th year of his reign, and the events related and allusions made in the memoirs of a prince of this time force on us the suspicion that he was murdered. Cheper Ka Ra Usertesen, 2099 through 2065 BC. When Usertesen I ascended the throne about 2099 BC, he succeeded to a mighty empire, firmly united in its various parts, and presenting a bold front to its hostile neighbors. Already, as co-regent, Usertesen had distinguished himself in the field, and his warlike ardor did not abate when he sat on the throne as sole ruler. He was compelled to take the field against the Libyan Bedouins, whom he subdued. In the 43rd year of his reign, he invaded Nubia and penetrated as far as the Second Cataract. Here he set up a stele on which he enumerates the names of 11 conquered Nubian tribes. Of these names, 9 are preserved. 1. Hu. 2. Kas. 3. Destroyed. 4. Shemek. 5. Chasah. 6. Sheat. 7. Ashurkin. 8. Owa. 9. Chemer. 10. Destroyed. 11. Amau. It is very unfortunate that we have no detailed accounts of these wars. We know only where the king warred and read the names of the conquered nations. But here our knowledge ends. This pharaoh opened the copper and malachite mines of the Set Mefkat, Malachite land, as the Egyptians called the Sinai Peninsula. He also quarried stone in the Wadi Hammamat. The most important of the buildings erected by this pharaoh were, of course, at Thebes. He built the priests' quarters at Karnak, which were restored in the reign of Ramses IX, and had his statue placed in the temple yard. A very fine, colossal statue of this king, which was found at Tanis, is now in the Museum of Berlin. In the 3rd year of his reign, according to the text written on a roll of leather preserved in the same museum, the pharaoh began work on the temple of Ra at Heliopolis. As his father was then still living, and he was merely co-regent, Amenemhat I appears as the directing spirit, while Usertesen seems to have exercised executive functions. The temple was called Het Cha Sehotepab Ra, that is, the Shining Temple of Amenemhat I, while a portion of it was named after Usertesen. The only trace left of this temple are 2 obelisks erected by Usertesen, one of which is still standing, while the other is fallen and in fragments. A peculiarly shaped obelisk, rounded at the apex and showing undoubted traces of the fact that it was once capped with metal, was found, broken in 2, at Begig in the Fayum. Owing to the fact that the fellahin of the region look upon it as sacred, it could not be removed. The king also built in Abydos. In his 42nd year, Usertesen appointed his son Amenemhat co-regent. 2 years after he died, having ruled in all 44 years, of which he shared 10 with his father and 2 with his son, and ruled 32 alone. Nubka-Ra Amenemhat, 2064 through 2031 BC, ascended the throne as sole king about 2064 BC. He was a ruler of no special prominence, but he was well able to keep together the great kingdom left him by his father. In the 28th year of his reign, this king sent an expedition under command of Chent Shah Ower to Arabia and the Somali coast, Pewent. The expedition was a success. This is the first time since the reign of Seanch-Ka-Ra that we hear of a government expedition sent to this country. Like his father, he worked at the Sinai copper mines and built at Sarbut el-Chadem a temple to Hathor, who was the tutelar deity of this region. He also operated the quarries of the Wadi Hammamat. In the 32nd year of his reign, he appointed his son Usertesen co-regent and died 3 years later, having ruled in all 35 years, 2 years as co-regent of his father, 30 years alone, and 3 years together with his son. Cha-Cheper-Ra Usertesen, 2030 through 2014 BC. Of Usertesen II, who came to the throne about 2030 BC, we know but little. Almost all our knowledge of his reign is confined to what the great inscriptions in the tombs at Beni Hassan and Bersha tell us of the social conditions of the time. In the first year of his reign, he sent an expedition to the Wadi Gasus, a branch of the Wadi Hammamat, which runs in a slanting northeast direction to the Red Sea. This expedition most probably went to Pewent. In the 5th year of his reign, he sent an expedition under Mentuhotep to Aswan, and it would seem from his inscription that the tribes dwelling about the quarries had given trouble and had been subdued. This pharaoh built at Memphis and Tanis, at which latter place a statue of his wife, Nefert, was found. In the times of the 12th dynasty, it was a customary thing for Syrian Bedouins to cross the Egyptian border and seek permission to pasture their herds on Egyptian soil. A migration of this character, which took place in the 6th year of this reign, is represented on a celebrated painting found in the tomb of Khenemhotep, the Nomarchos of the 16th Upper Egyptian nome. This painting represents the arrival of 37 Asiatics who came before that noble, bearing costly presents, among which was a specially valuable eye salve, seeking his protection and asking permission to settle on his territory. The painting has become widely known through the attempted identification of the people here depicted with Abraham and his party. This attempt, however, is futile. The Bible relates that Abraham came to Egypt on a similar errand, and that his stay in this country was advantageous to him. The account of the Bible shows a good knowledge of the conditions under which such migrations were made, and is certainly based on old recollections of the race, some parts of which no doubt did dwell in Egypt under these conditions, while they were yet in the nomadic state. Manetho calls this king Sesostris, and attributes to him the conquest of the world, but as yet no monuments have been discovered that bear out this statement. As Sesostris is the usual designation of Ramses II with the classical writers, it is, however, just possible that the copyists of Manetho got things slightly mixed. The king died after a reign of 19 years, 3 of which he shared with his father. Cha-Ka-Ra-Usertesen, 2013 through 1987 BC, who succeeded his father about 2013 BC, is one of the greatest figures of Egyptian history. He it was that finally subdued Ethiopia. The victories of Usertesen I had placed the southern boundary of the realm at the Second Cataract. Usertesen III immediately proceeded to strengthen this frontier and make it the basis of his operations. Having defeated the hostile tribes of the region, he built 2 forts on opposite sides of the Nile, one at Semneh and one at Kumneh, on this cataract, and in the 8th year of his reign erected a boundary stone warning all Negroes from coming down the river on their boats unless they were bringing cattle or merchandise to market at Heh, Semneh, or Aachen, Kumneh. In the 16th year of his reign, the pharaoh set out on his second campaign against the Nubians. He completely devastated the country, destroyed the crops, drove off the cattle, and took numerous prisoners. Despite this great victory, the Nubians were not yet completely subdued. In the 19th year of his reign, the king was again compelled to take the field against them, and again he completely defeated them, taking large numbers of prisoners and devastating the country. After this, the tribes seem to have submitted and remained tranquil, for during the rest of this epoch we hear of no new outbreaks. The king was an active builder. We have already mentioned two of his great works. He also built in Thebes, in Heracleopolis Magna, in Abydos, in Tanis, and in Amada. He was, moreover, the first founder of the temples on the island of Elephantine, where he erected a temple to Satet and Anuket, two of the local deities of the region. Near the island he founded a new city, which he called Heru Cha Ka-Ra. It is interesting to note how posterity honored this great monarch. Almost 600 years after the king's death, Thutmosis III erected a temple to him at Semna, and seems to have attempted to make him a local divinity of this region. He also appears as a god in the temple of Kumna, in that of Dosha, and at other places in Nubia. Usertesen died after a reign of 26 years. Mat-en-Ra, Amenemhat, 1986 through 1942 BC. About 1986 BC, Amenemhat III, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, ascended the throne. This king was not a great warrior and conqueror, but he was the projector and builder of an important work that was of far greater value to Egypt than would have been the conquest of a dozen or more of the border tribes. His fame rests on the immense reservoir he built in the western part of the 21st Upper Egyptian nome. This reservoir, according to all appearances, was built and not dug. A vast dam was erected, enclosing a large area in this part of the country. The exact extent of the reservoir we have no means of ascertaining, nor do we know exactly what part of the district known today as the Fayum was enclosed in its dams, some remains of which have been discovered. The object of this vast reservoir was to regulate the inundation of the Nile. It received and stored up for future use vast quantities of water. Just how this was accomplished, or where the floodgates were, or what canals led to and from the reservoir, we do not know. The great work is now in ruins, and we have no description of it as it was in the days of its builder. As stated on a previous page, this work gave to the district in which it was erected the name of Tashe, Lakeland, the modern name of the region, Fayum, being derived through the Coptic Fa-Yom from the ancient word Pa-Yom, the sea. In this reservoir, Amenemhat erected two pyramids. At Ilahun, on the northern outlet of the reservoir, a city, in all probability founded by the pharaoh, he built a pyramid in which he was buried. On the northeastern bank, he erected the great building known as the Labyrinth, about which the Greeks tell so many stories, and which was originally a temple, dedicated either entire or in part to the crocodile-headed god Sebak, the head of the local pantheon of this region. The city of Crocodilopolis, the Egyptian name of which seems to have been Shedet, lying on the west bank of the reservoir, was the capital of Ta-She, and was no doubt also founded by this ruler. The Greek name of the work, Lake Moeris, was most probably derived from the Egyptian word meri, lake. Despite the fact that the building of the reservoir and the cities lying about it must have taken up a great part of his time, Amenemhat still was able to erect buildings elsewhere. He certainly did not forget Thebes, and we hear that he built in Abydos and Memphis. Several expeditions, one of which the king led in person, were sent to the diorite quarries of the Wadi Hammamat. He also continued the working of the copper and malachite mines of the Sinai, and had a grotto cut into the rock at Sarbut el-Chadem. Of interest are the notes regarding the rise of the Nile, found on the rocks at Semneh and Kumneh, which prove that the Nile rose 27 feet 3 inches higher at these places during this time than it rises today. Toward the close of his reign of 44 years, he appointed his son Amenemhat co-regent. Ra-Ma-Cheru Amenemhat, 1941 through 1932 BC. This pharaoh, the fourth of his name, who ascended the throne about 1941 BC, was apparently a weak king. All we know of him is that he worked the copper mines of the Sinai, and had, like all kings of his line, the rise of the Nile carefully recorded at Semneh and Kumneh. He married his sister, Sebak Nefru Ra, whom he appointed co-regent. Together they ruled about 9 years. The close of the dynasty is shrouded in darkness. End of chapter 3.